I was just a finance assistant, until $2 million disappeared from the company system. No one asked what really happened. No one cared about the details. They just needed someone to blame. And suddenly, all eyes were on me. Within 24 hours, I went from a trusted employee to the prime suspect of a corporate theft. My co-workers stopped talking to me. My boss stopped believing me. And the CFO? He was the first one to point at me. But what they didn't know was, the truth was already recorded, hidden inside the very security cameras they thought were turned off. I still remember the exact moment everything started falling apart. It was 9:12 a.m. when I logged into the company finance system. The fluorescent lights above my desk were too bright, as usual, making my eyes feel tired before the day even began. My name is Emily Carter, 28 years old, finance assistant at Harrington Global Group. I was known for being precise, quiet, and a little too careful. I didn't like mistakes. Not because I feared punishment, but because my father once lost his job over a small accounting error, and I had promised myself I would never let something like that define me. I worked under Daniel Reed, the chief financial officer. Daniel was a man in his early 40s, tall and sharply dressed, always wearing tailored navy suits that looked expensive enough to make people uncomfortable. His hair was silvering slightly at the temples, not from age alone, but from stress, or maybe control. He spoke softly, but every word felt like it had already been calculated before leaving his mouth. People respected him, but no one truly relaxed around him. Rumors said he once destroyed a competitor company during a merger war and never looked back the same way again. That morning, I was reviewing the payment ledger for a major infrastructure project when I noticed something strange. A transaction line was missing, then another, and then I saw it. $2 million. Gone. Not pending, not delayed, just erased from the visible record. My stomach tightened. I refreshed the system again and again, thinking it was a glitch, but the number didn't return. That's when Michael Grant, the IT support technician, walked past my desk. Michael was a thin man in his mid-30s, slightly hunched from years of sitting in server rooms. He wore thick glasses and always carried a USB drive like it was a lifeline. He was shy, spoke rarely, but had an unusual habit of noticing things others missed. He glanced at my screen for half a second. His expression changed instantly. Then he kept walking. Too fast, too quiet. I called after him, but he didn't stop. 10 minutes later, I was summoned to the executive floor. And that's when I met Linda Hayes, the company's head of internal audit. She was in her late 30s, sharp bob haircut, perfectly pressed white blouse, and a face that never showed emotion unless it was judgment. People said she climbed the corporate ladder by surviving 3 company restructures without ever losing her position or her reputation. She didn't sit down. She didn't greet me. She simply placed a folder on the table. "Explain this," she said. Inside were screenshots of the missing $2 million transaction. My name was attached to the authorization trail. My signature, my login, my timestamp. I felt my hands go cold. "This is not possible," I said immediately. "I didn't authorize this." No one responded. Behind her, the glass door opened slightly. Daniel Reed was standing there, watching, silent. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying. This wasn't a mistake. This was already decided. The moment I stepped out of Linda Hayes' office, the atmosphere on the finance floor had changed completely. It wasn't loud or obvious. No one pointed fingers, no one shouted. But I could feel it in the way conversations stopped when I walked past. In just a few hours, I, Emily Carter, the same 28-year-old finance assistant known for accuracy and discipline, had become something else in their eyes. A risk. I returned to my desk, my hands still slightly shaking. The monitor felt colder than usual, as if it no longer belonged to me. That's when Ryan Blake, my direct supervisor, appeared. Ryan was a man in his mid-30s, average height, slightly stocky with neatly combed dark hair and tired eyes that always looked like he had slept only 4 hours a night for the past decade. He wasn't cruel by nature, but pressure had made him cautious, and caution often looked like betrayal. He had once been a promising analyst, but after a failed audit 5 years ago, he became obsessed with avoiding responsibility at all costs. He stood beside my desk without sitting down. "Emily," he said slowly, his voice lower than usual. "We need to talk about the transaction." "I already told Linda. I didn't authorize anything," I replied immediately. Ryan didn't answer right away. Instead, he opened a tablet and turned it toward me. "Your login was used. Your credentials. Your timestamp." "That's impossible," I said firmly. "I followed protocol. Every approval went through dual verification. I didn't bypass anything." Ryan exhaled, rubbing his forehead. "Then explain why the system shows only your access." Behind him, I noticed people pretending not to listen. Sarah Kim, a junior accountant in her early 20s, with long black hair always tied in a perfect ponytail, avoided my eyes completely. She was usually friendly, always asking questions, but now she kept typing even when her screen clearly wasn't changing. Fear had made her silent. Another colleague, Mark Ellis, a middle-aged payroll officer with a thick beard and a permanent sarcastic smile, whispered something to another employee and glanced at me. Mark had always been vocal, but now his silence felt heavier than his words ever did. My chest tightened. "I want a full audit trail," I said. "Not just my login. Show me the entire chain of access." Ryan hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. Before he could respond, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. A single message. Kunpun CFO. My breath stopped. I looked up instinctively across the glass-walled office. On the far side of the floor, Daniel Reed was standing near the window, talking quietly to Linda Hayes. His expression was unreadable, but for a brief second, his eyes shifted toward me. Not curiosity, control. Ryan noticed my reaction. "What is it?" "Nothing," I lied quickly, locking my phone. But nothing about this felt accidental anymore. Someone inside this company was guiding the narrative, and I was being positioned exactly where they wanted me. The meeting room on the 18th floor felt colder than usual, as if the air conditioning had been turned up just to make people uncomfortable. I, Emily Carter, sat at the long glass table with my hands folded tightly in my lap to hide the shaking. I was 28, a finance assistant known for precision and quiet discipline, but today I felt like I was being treated as something far more dangerous, something already guilty before the trial began. At the head of the table sat Daniel Reed, the CFO. He was a tall man in his early 40s, wearing a charcoal suit instead of his usual navy. His silver-tinged hair was perfectly styled, his posture relaxed, almost too relaxed for a man overseeing a financial crisis. Daniel had a reputation for surviving corporate collapses and restructuring entire departments without raising his voice. That calmness now felt like pressure pressing down on everyone in the room. Next to him was Linda Hayes, the head of internal audit. She was sharp, precise, her bob-cut hair framing a face that showed no emotional variation. She looked like someone who trusted data more than people, and today, I was not a person in her eyes. I was a data anomaly. Ryan Blake sat across from me, avoiding eye contact. His stocky frame leaned forward slightly, as if trying to physically distance himself from responsibility. His silence felt louder than accusation. Daniel finally spoke. "We are here to ensure transparency," he said calmly. "No assumptions, only facts." But the way he said facts felt like he already knew which version of them would survive. Linda slid a document across the table. "Your login accessed the transaction window at 2:14 p.m. The transfer occurred at 2:16 p.m. Same credentials." "That doesn't prove intent," I said quickly. "Anyone with access to my workstation could have used it, or remote access could have been forced." A few people shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke in my defense. Then Kevin Marshall, a senior compliance officer in his late 40s with thinning grey hair and a permanent crease between his eyebrows, leaned forward. He was known for being neutral in disputes, but his voice today carried a different tone. "Emily, the system doesn't show forced entry. It shows clean authentication." I looked around the room. No allies. No support. Even Sarah Kim, the young accountant with the perfect ponytail, avoided my gaze entirely. Mark Ellis, the payroll officer with the sarcastic smile, now looked at his notes as if I wasn't even present. Then Daniel spoke again. "I propose a full internal investigation," he said. "Completely transparent, no interference." It sounded fair. Too fair. As he spoke, I noticed something strange on the presentation screen behind him. A system log timeline. A gap. 15 minutes missing. I leaned forward. "What happened during that time block?" Linda hesitated for half a second too long. "Server maintenance." "That's not scheduled," I said immediately. Ryan finally spoke, voice low. "IT confirmed a temporary shutdown." But my phone buzzed under the table. Unknown number again. A second message. "Check the server logs. They're lying." My pulse quickened, because now I knew something wasn't just wrong. It was being erased. The decision came faster than I expected. I, Emily Carter, 28 years old finance assistant at Harrington Global Group, was sitting in a small HR office that smelled faintly of cheap coffee and old paper when they told me I was being suspended. The room was plain, almost intentionally so. White walls, a grey table, and a single plant that looked like it had stopped growing years ago. Across from me sat Helen Whitmore, the head of human resources. She was in her early 50s, short and slightly heavy-set, with carefully curled blonde hair that had begun to lose its shine. Her voice was soft, almost motherly, but her eyes were trained to detach emotion from consequences. She had handled dozens of corporate crises, layoffs, and internal scandals, and over time she had learned how to make destruction sound like procedure. "Emily," she said gently, sliding a document toward me. "This is a temporary suspension pending investigation." Temporary. But we both knew what that meant. Behind her stood Robert Kane, a legal advisor in his late 30s, tall and lean with sharp cheekbones and a constantly furrowed brow. He wore thin-rimmed glasses and spoke very little, but when he did, it felt like he was calculating risk rather than expressing opinion. He didn't look at me directly. Instead, he looked at the papers, as if I was already a closed case file. "You will have no system access during this period," Helen continued. "This is standard protocol." Standard. Another word that made guilt sound routine. I nodded slowly, because arguing felt pointless. The company had already moved past doubt and into containment. As I left the building, the glass doors reflected my image back at me, pale, exhausted, and unfamiliar. I used to walk through those doors with purpose. Now I felt like I was being pushed out of them. That evening, I didn't go home immediately. My phone rang again. My mother. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hi, Mum." Her voice was warm, unaware. Emily, sweetheart, how is work? You sound tired lately. I forced a small laugh. Just busy season, nothing serious. There was a pause. You're not overworking yourself again, are you? Your father would— I'm fine, I interrupted gently, sharper than I intended. Really, I just need rest. Silence. I'm proud of you, she said softly. Always. When the call ended, I stayed in my car for a long time without moving. Meanwhile, back inside the Harrington Global server room, Michael Grant, the IT technician, sat alone under the cold blue glow of monitors. He was thin, slightly hunched, with pale skin and tired eyes that made him look older than his mid-30s. He rarely spoke to anyone unless necessary, shaped by years of being ignored until problems became emergencies. He stared at a blinking folder labelled Audit Logs, Restricted Access. His fingers hesitated. Then he copied everything, quickly, carefully. And just before the system automatically flagged the activity, he whispered to himself, "This isn't right." He hit upload to an external backup drive hidden inside a maintenance case. The system log updated. Someone had already tried to delete it, but now it was too late, because a copy had already left the building. And I didn't know it yet, but that was the first real crack in the story they were building against me. After the suspension, I, Emily Carter, 28-year-old former finance assistant of Harrington Global Group, was officially erased from the company's daily life. My access cards stopped working, my email was disabled, and even my desk had likely already been reassigned. But being locked out didn't stop me from watching. I stayed close to the building that afternoon, sitting inside a small cafe across the street. The place was called Brew and Bite, a quiet coffee shop filled with the sound of keyboards and tired freelancers. It smelled like burnt espresso and ambition. From there, I could see the finance floor windows, bright, distant, untouchable. That's when I met Victor Lane, a former data analyst from Harrington Global, who had left the company 6 months earlier after what people called a mutual resignation. Victor was in his early 30s, tall and slightly unkempt, with curly brown hair and a habit of tapping his fingers constantly, even when he wasn't working. He had a reputation for being brilliant with systems, but socially difficult. He questioned too much, especially when things didn't add up. That habit had cost him his position. Victor slid into the seat opposite me without asking. "You shouldn't be here," he said flatly. "I need access to backup logs," I replied. He exhaled, almost amused. "Of course you do. Everyone who gets framed suddenly becomes an investigator." Despite his sarcasm, he pulled out a laptop. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Deciding whether I'm ruining my life twice for the same company," he said. Then he opened a hidden portal into a shadow backup system, one I didn't even know existed. Inside the encrypted logs, I saw it, the transaction timeline. And something wrong. The $2 million transfer didn't just happen under my credentials. There was a secondary override at 2:16 p.m., executed from an internal executive node, not mine, a higher-level account. My breath slowed. "This doesn't match the official report," I whispered. Victor leaned closer. Because it was cleaned, someone already edited the visible logs. That's when my phone vibrated again. Unknown number. "Stop digging!" 3 words, cold, immediate. Across the street, through the cafe window, I saw him. Daniel Reed, CFO, standing outside the building, not inside it, watching the finance floor like he was counting invisible movements. Victor noticed my expression. "That's him, isn't it?" I didn't answer, but I didn't need to. Meanwhile, inside Harrington Global, Daniel Reed was not acting like a man under investigation pressure. He was calm, almost patient. Beside him stood Olivia Grant, a corporate security consultant in her mid-30s. She was tall, athletic, with tightly tied black hair and sharp, observant eyes that missed almost nothing. She had a military background before entering corporate security, which made her extremely disciplined and unnervingly quiet. She followed instructions without question, but only from the person she trusted. Daniel spoke softly. "She accessed something she shouldn't have." Olivia nodded once. "We increased monitoring." "No," Daniel said. A faint smile appeared. "We let her think she is ahead." Back in the cafe, Victor continued digging, a
A second discrepancy appeared. The server shutdown window, the same 15-minute gap from earlier, was not maintenance. It was a manual isolation, a deliberate blackout, and inside that blackout, someone had full control of the system. Victor closed the laptop slowly. "Emily," he said quietly, "this isn't just a framing. This is coordinated." I looked back at the glass building. For the first time, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't trying to prove my innocence anymore. I was trying to survive whoever was rewriting reality itself.
I, Emily Carter, had stopped feeling like an employee a long time ago. Now I felt like something between an intruder and a fugitive. After leaving the cafe with Victor Lane, I couldn't go home. Every reflection on the street glass looked like someone was watching me think. Victor had given me a small encrypted drive and told me to look deeper, not wider. I didn't fully understand what he meant until I saw it. Late that night, I borrowed access again through Victor's temporary bypass system. The screen flickered as I entered the hidden audit layer of Harrington Global's financial network. That's when I found it. A chain of transactions routed through a middle layer account named Project Bridge Node. At first glance, it looked like a normal internal reconciliation tool. But the deeper I followed it, the clearer the pattern became. The money didn't come from my account directly. It was funneled through multiple internal nodes before being assigned to me as the final authorizing user. Someone had built a financial maze, and I was the exit point. That's when I noticed something even worse: the log cleanup signatures. Every time the system wrote a trace, it was overwritten within seconds by a higher-level override protocol. Only one category of user could execute that level of deletion: executive access. My hands froze on the keyboard. At that moment, Victor messaged me. "Check server subdivision C." Inside subdivision C, I found a restricted folder labeled CAM. It should not have existed. The system registry showed it was deleted months ago, but the file structure was still physically stored in an isolated backup partition. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a partial video feed. The server room, 15-minute blackout window. And someone was inside. Not me, not IT maintenance. A man in a dark suit walked calmly into the frame, using an executive access card. The camera angle didn't capture his face fully, but the posture, the way he moved, calculated, unhurried, was familiar. Daniel Reed. I felt my breath tighten. Meanwhile, across town in a dim underground parking structure, I met Jason Miller, the senior IT systems architect, who had been quietly watching the chaos unfold from the shadows of the company infrastructure. Jason was in his late 30s, tall but slightly hunched, with short, buzzed hair and tired eyes that looked like they hadn't slept properly in years. He was known as a genius in system architecture, but had grown increasingly paranoid after years of seeing corporate data manipulation. Jason didn't greet me. He simply said, "They already tried to erase that folder." "You knew?" I asked. "I knew something was wrong the day the logs were rewritten from executive level," he replied. He showed me something I hadn't seen before, a backup snapshot of system integrity logs. It confirmed everything. The CFO's credential signature appeared repeatedly in restricted override commands. Back at Harrington Global, Ryan Blake sat alone in his office, staring at resignation drafts he hadn't yet sent. His face looked more exhausted than guilty now. He had begun to realize he wasn't part of the framing, but he was part of the silence that allowed it. And somewhere above him, Linda Hayes was reviewing compliance reports that had been subtly altered before reaching her desk. Everything was being controlled at multiple layers, not just erased, rewritten. And I was standing in the middle of a system designed to make truth disappear before it could ever exist. I no longer thought of myself as an employee trying to prove innocence. I thought of myself as someone preparing for war inside a glass building that smiled while it lied. After meeting Jason Miller and receiving Victor Lane's encrypted confirmations, The truth was no longer scattered. It was forming a pattern sharp enough to cut through denial. We gathered in a small rented workspace above an old printing shop downtown. The place smelled of ink, dust, and forgotten deadlines. Victor sat across from me, still the same disheveled former data analyst in his early 30s, fingers constantly tapping as if he was rewriting code in the air. Jason Miller stood near the window, tall and slightly hunched, arms crossed, his exhausted eyes scanning every device like he expected them to betray us. Neither of them trusted corporations anymore, but they were willing to trust data. We laid everything out. Transaction routes, executive override logs, the hidden bridge node system, and most importantly, the recovered camera footage showing Daniel Reed entering the server room during the blackout window. For the first time, the story was no longer speculation. It was structure. "I can't just submit this internally," I said quietly. "They'll bury it before it reaches the board." Victor smirked slightly. "Then you don't submit it. You expose it." Jason looked at me directly. "Public internal broadcast during the quarterly company meeting. Every department is connected to the same live network. If we inject the evidence at the right time, they can't erase it without shutting down the entire system." That was the plan forming. Not revenge, exposure. Meanwhile, inside Harrington Global, Daniel Reed stood in his office overlooking the city skyline. He was calm in the way only someone fully in control of hidden systems could be. Beside him was Marcus Hale, a corporate legal strategist in his mid-40s, tall, bald, with sharp, almost surgical eyes. Marcus had built his reputation defending executives during financial scandals. He was not emotional, he was structural, like law made human. "They're assembling evidence," Marcus said. Daniel didn't turn. "I know." Marcus hesitated. "If the board sees the camera footage, they won't see it," Daniel interrupted softly. His tone wasn't angry, it was certain. Across the city, CEO Richard Caldwell, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and a reputation for cautious leadership, was reviewing fragmented reports. Unlike Daniel, Richard was not manipulative. He was uncertain. He believed in structure, but he also believed in proof. And right now, the proof he was receiving didn't align. He leaned back in his chair. "Something is off," he muttered to himself. But he had no full picture yet, and that gap in understanding was exactly what Daniel was relying on. Back in the rented workspace, I finalized the sequence injection plan. Every piece of evidence had been arranged into a timed cascade. Transaction proof first, then log overrides, then the camera footage. Jason adjusted the encryption layer. "Once this triggers, there's no undo." "I'm not trying to undo anything," I said. "I'm trying to make sure they can't rewrite it again." Victor leaned back, almost amused. "You're not just fighting a CFO anymore." I looked at him. He didn't finish the sentence, but I already knew. I was fighting the system that let him exist. I stood outside the glass-walled conference hall of Harrington Global Group, feeling the weight of everything that had led me here. I was no longer the quiet finance assistant they had once dismissed. I was 28 years old, once soft-spoken and detail-obsessed, now someone who had learned how easily truth could be erased and how violently it had to be restored. My hands were steady this time, not because I wasn't afraid, but because fear had already happened too many times to control me anymore. Inside the room, the entire executive board was present. The air felt dense, as if even the building knew something irreversible was about to happen. At the center sat CEO Richard Caldwell, a man in his early 60s with silver hair, sharp but tired eyes, and a posture that carried authority built from decades of leadership. He was not corrupt, just dangerously slow to see manipulation when it was dressed as order. To his right was Daniel Reed, the CFO. Early 40s, tall, immaculate charcoal suit, calm expression that no longer felt reassuring, but rehearsed. Beside him stood Marcus Hale, the corporate legal strategist, bald, precise, and unreadable, like a man who had already prepared arguments for both truth and lies. The meeting began normally: financial reports, projections, restructuring updates. No one suspected what was coming. Then Richard said, "Before we proceed, there is a final agenda item, a financial discrepancy involving internal authorization." That was my cue. I entered. A ripple moved through the room as I walked to the front. Some looked confused, others uncomfortable. Ryan Blake, my former supervisor, sat at the back, leaning forward slightly, his expression conflicted, as if guilt had finally become too heavy to ignore. I connected my device to the main display. Victor Lane had ensured the system bypass was stable. Jason Miller had stabilized the data feed minutes before. Somewhere outside the building, they were both watching the signal. The first file appeared. Transaction map. The $2 million flow, rerouted through Bridge Node. Murmurs spread across the room. Then the override logs appeared. Executive-level authentication. A pause. I saw Daniel shift slightly for the first time. Next, the server blackout footage. The screen froze on the image of Daniel Reed entering the server room during the 15-minute shutdown window. Calm, controlled, certain. The room went silent. Marcus Hale leaned toward Daniel. "Explain this." Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood slowly. "This is manipulated data." But then I activated the final layer. A full audit reconstruction Jason had verified 3 times. It showed not just access, but intent mapping. Patterns of repeated override usage across multiple internal incidents. Richard Caldwell stood up. "Daniel, is this real?" For the first time, Daniel's calm cracked, not into panic, but calculation. "You're seeing fragments without context." But no one was listening anymore. The board members began speaking over each other. Then Ryan Blake stood up from the back. His voice was low, but clear. "It's real. I saw access anomalies weeks ago. I said nothing." That was the turning point. Silence fell again. Richard exhaled deeply. "Daniel Reed, effective immediately. You are suspended pending termination and legal investigation." No shouting. No resistance, just finality. Daniel looked at me once. Not anger, recognition, as if I had simply completed a move he had underestimated. After the meeting, Richard addressed the entire company via internal broadcast. "I was wrong to allow suspicion to replace verification," he said, "and I apologize to Emily Carter." The words felt heavier than the accusation ever had. Later that day, HR reinstated me. My access was restored. My position was upgraded with formal recognition for internal integrity review assistance. Jason Miller received a formal award for preserving critical audit data, despite pressure to delete it. He accepted it quietly, as if he didn't fully trust praise. Victor simply said, "You didn't win because you were right. You won because you refused to disappear." And for the first time in a long time, I believed that wasn't just a conclusion. It was a beginning. In the end, the truth came out, but everything had a price. Now, I want to ask you, if you were me, would you stay silent and protect your job, or risk everything to expose the truth? If you were the CEO, would you trust a powerful CFO or a low-level assistant with no power? And if you were Ryan, would you speak up early or stay silent to save yourself? There is no easy choice, only consequences. Tell me in the comments, would you choose safety or truth? And don't forget to like and subscribe for more insane office drama stories.